Colombia Business News Recap. It is December 10th, 2025. We're just coming out of the December 7th holiday here in Colombia, Noche de Velas, when everybody lights candles. There was a big fire in a high-rise apartment in one of the suburbs of Medellín. Lots of people like to light off firecrackers this time of year. Early this morning, about 3 a.m., there was a big earthquake. It was, well, relatively speaking, it was about a 5.8 in the Richter scale. I haven't seen any damage reports, but it was felt in a lot of the country. It was the earthquake, the epicenter was somewhere not far away from Bucaramanga over in Santander. It was also felt in Bogotá. It was felt in Antioquia around Medellín. I felt it early this morning. It was a very long earthquake. It's interesting. I being from a place where the geology is very old, meaning that we sit upon a craton from an orogeny going back 300 million years, and so that area is very seismically quiet. It's quite something. I remember my first earthquake in Colombia. I was in Medellin, and it's kind of weird. It felt like a ghost had grabbed your chair and was shaking it or something like that. But it's all fun and games as long as nobody gets hurt. So anyway, I guess the good news is that not only was nobody hurt, but modern buildings in Colombia, when they are built to code, which is not always the case, if we look at the historical example of the space condominiums that had to be torn down after one of them fell down without an earthquake, just by bad construction, even though it was a luxury apartment building. We know that that's not always the case. So what's going on? Gustavo Petro's tax reform has failed last week, despite his consigliere and Interior Minister Armando Benedetti. His machinations in Congress, a congressional committee has voted 9-4 to reject Petro's tax reform bill that sought to bring in 16.3 trillion more pesos to fill a hole in Colombia's budget. The 2026 budget is 547 trillion pesos, and the government does not have enough money to pay for it. So the president has threatened to declare an economic emergency, but courts have already ruled in the past in Colombia that Congress not giving you what you want does not constitute an economic emergency. An economic emergency is something like COVID and an invasion by Venezuela or something, or maybe the Nevado de Ruiz volcano blowing up like it did back in, I think, in 1989 when we had the Armero tragedy down there in the Caldas and Quindío, in the Eje Cafetero, the coffee country, the coffee region. So Petro has used debt swaps this year. We wrote about it in Finance Colombia, to exchange short-term liquidity for more long-term debt, which saddles future administrations with the spending decisions that are being made under this administration. That saddles future administrations, let's say whoever wins the next election, and then the election after that, and then of course at the end the Colombian people with the consequences of these fiscal decisions. So Petro has come out on Twitter complaining and blaming everyone for his failure, which is kind of his tendency. So it's a pattern. He'll make a big promise, and then when it fails, it's everyone else's fault. So Petro ran his campaign, if you remember, on total peace. Petro's going to put an end to armed conflict and crime in Colombia. I mean, he said this when he ran as a former guerrilla, when he ran for president. Everything's going to be flowers and rainbows and unicorns, and these rebel groups are going to have a nice talking to, and all they need is somebody to give them a hug like Barney the dinosaur or something like that, and they'll come in from the cold. But of course it didn't work. They're criminals because they want to be criminals, not because of any kind of social exclusion or because they feel bullied by the capitalist elite or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, so now he's blaming Congress. He's blaming he blames Congress for not passing his bill. Well, they didn't pass it because they don't like it. So they're not supposed to pass it. That's kind of why they get voted into Congress by their constituents. He's even blaming his own central bank who makes, the central bank is supposed to have a certain degree of autonomy and make decisions based on economics, monetary policy, things like that. And they have set economic policy based on economics, not based on Petro's political agenda. He's mad at them for that because so I'll give you an example just generically. So if you're a central banker and you say, okay, we want to keep inflation down because inflation obviously makes everybody more poor because you have the same amount of money, but you can buy less with it, right? So how do we do that? So if we increase interest rates, that keeps inflation down. Now, if we decrease interest rates to the point to where we goose the economy and interest rates are allowed to take off, or no, if interest rates are lower and then inflation is allowed to take off, what happens then is that your money becomes worth less. But let's suppose you have debt that's denominated in your own currency, then it takes less value, or another way to put it is less real money, not currency, not based on the face value of the currency, to pay off that debt. Of course, foreign debt, usually that's why foreign debt is usually denominated in, let's say, dollars or some other kind of reserve currency, because the lenders don't trust you, the government, to not do that, because all you have to do is hyperinflate your currency, and then if your currency is denominated in the local debt, then it becomes cheaper to pay off. So we can look at other examples. Wherever you see hyperinflation and things like that, you can see machinations and different things that cause these types of distortions. So the central bank in Colombia is not allowing that to happen. Petro's upset with them. And then he's even blaming former president. So he's blaming Ivan Duque, who left office 3 years ago, more than 3 years ago. He wrote some long speech on Twitter. It's too long to try to paraphrase or translate for you here, so we'll put a link to it in the show notes. His son, Nicolás Petro, is in more trouble. So Petro is already being prosecuted for campaign finance irregularities, for bringing dirty money into his dad's campaign. It's an interesting case. His ex, Dave Vasquez, who was, hell hath no fury like a scorned woman, right? So they kind of, when Nicolás Petro ran off with another woman, Day was like, I'll get you. And so she did. So she came out and basically denounced Nicolás Petro, the president's son. I think it's his oldest son or only son. I know he has 2 daughters, I think. But anyway, she comes out and denounces her ex for illegal campaign financing. And so now he's under house arrest while he's going through prosecution for bringing in money, illicit money from criminals, whether narco criminals, smugglers, people like that, into the Petro presidential campaign. He's also in trouble for things that he did when he was in the legislature. So the prosecutor, Lucy Laborde, she requested a preventive detention order. So basically, you're not out on bail. So basically, we're saying we're holding you pending trial against Petro for undue interest in the awarding of contracts, falsification of public documents, influence peddling, and embezzlement. These are in addition to the charges that he's already facing. And this case revolves around his alleged involvement in irregular contracting while he was in the Atlántico department. The Atlántico department is where Barranquilla is on Colombia's Caribbean coast. And so you have the Magdalena River that comes flowing south to north, emptying into the Caribbean Sea. And so right there, Barranquilla is the largest city on the Caribbean. To the southwest, you have Cartagena. To the northeast, you have Santa Marta. And so the allegations are that in 2021, he and Dave Vasquez used contracts from the Atlántico governor's administration. They had a social awareness foundation, and they used that as a slush fund to give out money and favors to friends and family with rigged agreements. So the Attorney General also has issued charges for unjustified increase in assets when he was a deputy meaning a legislator for Atlántico. So a lot of Latin American countries, a lot of countries around the world, but what Colombia does, which is a really good thing, is that they look at, so if you're going to be a public official, like you're going to be a governor or something like that, they say, okay, you've got to declare all your assets at the beginning when you're going to go into office. And then they look at your assets throughout, like, let's say when you leave office. And if we know that the salary is, let's say, $100,000 a year, then I'm just pulling a number out of the sky. Then, okay, if you had $200,000 of net assets, I've got a house, I've got a mortgage, I got a car, blah, 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 retirement account, whatever. Then if all of a sudden 3 years later you have $10 million in assets, you've got to show where that money came from. So they're looking at that, and they're going to watch you after you leave office too, to make sure that you didn't come into all kind of funny money and things like that. And so that's when we talk about illicit enrichment and an unjustified increase of assets. You better show where that money came from and make sure that it's legal. And this is kind of an anti-bribery type of thing. An interesting thing that's in the news right now, it's not exactly new. It didn't just happen yesterday, but in this past year, Colombia is now a net importer of natural gas. A friend of mine, who I don't want to call him out publicly, but he is he's an executive with one of the global petroleum giants. And I was with him in a car. This was in Bogotá, and this was about 5 years ago. I think it was during the pandemic, actually. But he told me, he said, Colombia is going to run out of gas. Colombia is going to run out of natural gas. And I thought he was nuts. I didn't think he was nuts, but I'm thinking, how can Colombia, which is a country with in the top 10 petroleum reserves globally, how can Colombia run out of natural gas? And so he told me it was going to happen. And basically, there's a lot of gas in the ground. There's a lot of petroleum in the ground. And this was either the end of the Santos administration or the beginning of the Iván Duque administration. But he basically told me, he said, Colombia, their reserves are dwindling, and the country has not taken the steps to allow for drilling and production and extraction of the natural gas that the country needs, not even to export, but for its own domestic consumption. He told me this was going to happen, and it's not that I didn't believe him. I'm not an expert in petroleum. He is, but he's right. So Santos and Duque deserve part of the blame because petroleum reserves dwindled during their administration, and so drilling of new wells almost stopped. But Petro has kind of declared war on petroleum, blocking new development, outlawing fracking, and he's told Ecopetrol, which is the state-controlled petroleum company, the largest Colombian company, period. It trades on the New York Stock Exchange's EC. Ricardo Roa, who's involved in his own scandal when it comes to illicit enrichment and sweetheart deals and things like that. Roa, who is the CEO of Ecopetrol, was Petro's campaign manager. So we can see how he got his position. But Petro has basically told Ecopetrol that he's tried to get them to divest from their joint venture assets. So Ecopetrol owns assets in Texas in the U.S. Permian gas field, which are a great source of income for Colombia. But Petro wants to get rid of it because he's like, oh, it's fracking, and we don't want to be involved in fracking, and so we should sell that off. Now, if he sells it off, the fracking will still happen, but Colombia won't benefit from the income that it generates. So not only that, he's kind of prevented new drilling, new exploratory drilling, new extractive drilling here in Colombia, and that means that as the country continues to consumers use natural gas. I use it. I've got a natural gas stove in the kitchen. We've got a natural gas water heater. And there are a lot of natural gas cars. People convert taxis and things like that to be able to use their vehicles running. And see, this was always encouraged because people say, oh, stop burning gasoline, burn natural gas. And they gave you kind of subsidies and benefits and things like that. But now with this happening and gas being scarce and the country having to actually import gas because the government refuses to take the gas out of the ground, gas prices have shot up to at wholesale over 33%, almost double retail. And now what happens? And so it's interesting because another thing that we've seen is that in the past few years, there's been a lot of running of natural gas lines before. If you're kind of in a low income area or not even necessarily low income, but you live way out in the sticks somewhere, let's say in a forest or rural area or El Campo or out in the country, you have to get your gas delivered. Companies like Coal Gas and Gases del Caribe and Gases de Antioquia, they come on a big truck and they bring you these big cylinders, propane cylinders. Like you see in the U.S., you see these people hook them up to gas grills so they can cook out in the backyard and things like that. Or they look like welding tanks. So what happens is that people have gone from using these tanks to having central natural gas. My own mother-in-law, for example, and she lives in kind of a modest income area, not a slum or anything like that, but it's kind of a lower income area, what in Colombia people would call estrato dos tres. So they just got natural gas to their house, a natural gas line put in, so you just have it coming out of the tap like for your stove or anything like that, just about 2 or 3 years ago. And even in the rural, or not rural, but let's say less developed or lower income areas, then some people are still using the gas canisters. But here's the problem. By raising the price, not that the government says, oh, the price is going to be this, but because of the artificial scarcity, let's call it that. The same government that's claiming to be the environmental government that's going to save the Amazon rainforest and be a friend of the environment and all this kind of nonsense, not nonsense that those are bad ideas, but nonsense that they're actually accomplishing these things. The problem is if you take people who have a marginal income, who can barely afford natural gas, and then natural gas becomes scarce where they can't get it, or it becomes too expensive, they go back to what they were doing before, which is burning wood. So when they burn wood, that means that they have to chop down trees. So when you chop down trees, and we're in the country where we have rainforest, we have the Amazon jungle, the Amazon rainforest, then we have over west of Medellín, you have Chocó, and there's a rainforest over there. Then you have the one up by Santa Marta, by the whole forested area near between La Guajira and Magdalena, for example. Then those people who don't have the resources to go and buy this artificially expensive natural gas are going to go back to chopping down trees, deforestation, which actually has continued to increase during the current administration. So these are the consequences. So his war on natural gas is actually not stopping the consumption of hydrocarbons, because trees are hydrocarbon made out of lignin, which is it's a protein hydrocarbon, things like that. So we're burning these not only hydrocarbons, but we're burning down literally the rainforest. So these are the problems that we have right now, and this is how not only is it hurting all Colombians, but especially poor Colombians, it's also hurting the environment. So that's what's happening right now with this war on petroleum or war on natural gas. If we say, hey, we want to move away from petroleum in the long term, yes, that probably does make sense. I'm not some kind of guy who wants to go out there and, like, I don't know, make new coal plants or anything like that. But I'm just saying this artificial restriction and artificial scarcity being created by government policy is actually hurting the environment. It's hurting the poor that this administration claims to support so much. And it's counterproductive. It's also hurting Colombia's position because Colombia used to be a net exporter. That brings in hard currency to the country. It brings in foreign exchange. It helps the country economically. But now Colombia not only is, so you have gas in the ground, but you're actually bringing this stuff in on ships. That means that the consumption stays largely the same. People are still burning it, but they're not burning Colombian petroleum or Colombian natural gas. They're burning foreign natural gas. That does not help the environment at all. All it does is hurt the economy, and it hurts Colombian consumers. It hurts Colombian forest, and especially the poor. Speaking of the administration, let's talk about Petro's Paz Total, his total peace. This was his big campaign promise he ran, saying that we're going to have total peace, and it's going to be this utopia, and there's going to be no rebels and no boogeymen and no ELN and no FARC. But we have a new meaning in the last couple months, scandal that's rocking the country, and a lot of this has been done. The kind of revelations have come out of Noticias Caracol. Caracol is one of the big media networks in Colombia, and they've exposed alleged high-level collusion between functionaries in the Colombian government and FARC dissidents. So the investigation says that there's this bad guy out there named Calarcá. Calarcá is actually a place in Colombia, but these guys, when they decide that they want to be rebels, they tend to get these nicknames or nomes de guerra, right? So this guy Calarcá is a warlord out there. First, Petro declares him to be a peace manager or a gestor de paz. So in Petro's total peace fantasy, he's going to take all of these bad guys and then he's going to make them peace managers. And he's going to go to the Mafia Don and say, hey, Mafia Don, I'm going to put you in charge of nonviolence. So it'd be like if you went to, I don't know, one of these guys, Al Capone. If you went to Al Capone and said, Al Capone, I'm going to make you in charge of anti-smuggling because you really don't want to be a smuggler. You would like to be a kindergarten teacher or something like that. And just, nobody's giving you a chance and you're a victim. And so I'm going to come and help you. So kind of like that, I don't know, fantasy mentality. So this guy, Calarcá, was made a peace manager, gestor de paz, by the Petro administration while he was coordinating a criminal enterprise under government protection. They captured some of his people like over a year ago down in I think in Cauca, which is the Colombian department or the Colombian state or province south of Cali. So Cali's in Valle de Cauca, and then you have Cauca, and then you go south of that and you get into Nariño and then Popayán, and then you're in Ecuador. So they got these documents that implicate a retired army general and then the current basically internal spy master, the head of the DNI. So for those of you who know recent Colombian history, used to have the DAS, Department of Administrative Services, which was kind of like Colombia's internal spy agency. And they got disbanded because they had a big scandal where they were spying on political opposition. This was during the Uribe administration, Alvaro Uribe, and they were spying on people he didn't like, and they were spying on people not because they were criminals or because they were violent and subversive, but just because they were political opponents. So the DAS gets disbanded, and then it gets replaced by the DNI. So the DNI is basically the new DAS with a new name. It's supposed to be the kinder and gentler DAS, right? So according to this investigation by Caracol, high government officials have been feeding military coordinates like troop coordinates. So, hey, this is where the army is that's coming looking for you. Or this is where the national police are, and they're setting up a roadblock so that they can catch you. Giving these people information so that they could evade capture and to protect these members of the FARC dissidents, meaning the people that didn't sign on to the 2016 peace accords and would rather stay out there fighting. So the documents and the Caracol investigation say that the files also implicate the group. They continue to, so what they do is they come and they steal your kids, to be blunt about it. This happened, my wife's family, she would tell me, we were talking about this the other day, where she has two brothers and one of them got sent away, and the other one, they would have to like pretend he was nuts or something like that, because the FARC, they lived way out in the country when they were kids, and the FARC would come and take your kid and make him a FARC soldier against his will. Or they would take the girls and either make them soldiers if they could indoctrinate them, or basically sexual captives. This has all been well documented and continues to happen today. Not as much as it did 30 years ago, but it happens. So these groups continue to recruit child soldiers, basically kidnapping people's kids and making them fight against their will. Ordered assassinations during the government's past total peace ceasefire, and leaked chats discuss illicit funding flowing into President Petro's 2022 campaign. We talked about how Nicolás Petro is already being prosecuted and facing charges for illicit money coming into the campaign. But when you had back during the last presidential election, you had two approaches by different candidates, which was either let's eliminate these dissidents, let's eliminate these criminals, we're going to break the back of these mafias and make sure that they don't exist anymore, to Petro's, no, they just need a nice talking to. They need hugs. They need, I think it's similar to in Mexico where AMLO, Luis Lopez Obrador, the former president, what did he say? Abrazos no balas, which is like hugs, not bullets kind of thing. And so obviously these groups like ELN and FARC dissidents and whoever else is out there, they're going to want the candidate to be elected who's going to be the softest on them. So if there's a candidate saying, oh, we're not going to eliminate you, we're going to sit down and give you a nice talking to and talk to you and talk to you and talk to you, that's who they want elected, right? If you have two choices, one person wants to give you a talking to, let's say you have parents, and let's go back, because I guess it's not politically correct now. Let's go back to 1970 when kids used to get butt whippings, right? So you have two parents, a mom and a dad. One parent, if you get in trouble, they're going to give you a talking to and put you in timeout. Other parent is going to beat that ass, okay? So I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying this is how it was. Which parent do you prefer? The one that's going to give you a talking to? Well, I remember some kids would say, no, I just want to get my ass beaten, butt whipping and get it over with, because then I can go on about my way. But anyway, the same principle is applying here, where these criminal groups want got the guy who's going to be softest on crime. And that actually is what's happened, because it takes us to the next update that I want to bring you, and that's on El Tarimazo. El Tarimazo, so a tarima basically is a stage. If I make not a scaffolding, what are these things called? Not a bleacher. I forget if there's a word for them. So like we're going to, like in school, and there's going to be a school play or a rock band or any kind of play, any kind of event. And then you've got to make the stage, right? And the stage is built on these kind of scaffold things, or bleachers. So that's a tarima. That's in Spanish, that's a tarima. So el tarimazo is a political scandal that happened. Again, going back to this whole idea of we're going to give you a nice talking to, and the criminals just need hugs and understanding and that kind of thing. So back in June 21st, the president, and he kind of did this to poke the eyes, because the president of, or not the president, the governor of Antioquia, who's actually in Washington today, and the mayor of Medellín, Federico Gutierrez, are politically not opposed, let's say politically opposed to Gustavo Petro and his administration and his political philosophies. So the president flies into Medellín and he organizes an event in El Alpujarra. Alpujarra is like the government, sort of like a town square. If you go to it, it's not really a square, but that is where in Medellín you have the administration of Antioquia, the department or the state of Antioquia, and you also have City Hall. All of this is in this one big government complex called El Alpujarra. And so Petro comes in back on June 21st, and he has a public rally. And it was supposed to be to celebrate the labor reform, but that kind of, it turned into a celebration or a rally for his Paz Total, for his Total Peace initiative. So during this televised rally, he brings in these mafia bosses. They take him out of jail. And these are people from Medellin gangs and mafias, people like alias Tom, alias meaning like that's his alias. So like I said, all of these guys, once you're a certified bad guy in Colombia, you're supposed to take on a nickname. It's kind of like pro wrestling or rappers, where you don't use your real name, but you get a stage name. So Carlos Pesebre, these are people from the famous La Oficina de Envigado, which is kind of the descendant. It's not like it used to be back in the days, but it's sort of traces its lineage to the Escobar things back then in the 80s and whatever. But so they go and take these people out of jail. These are not suspects. These are convicted criminals that are in jail serving their time. So they were in prison down in Itagüí, which is a suburb in the south of Medellin, where they have a maximum security prison. And they brought them to the stage to be peace spokespersons. Now, again, this is like going and getting Al Capone and I don't know. I'm not a super expert on bad guys. What was that guy, Teflon Don? What was that guy's name? John Gotti. It was like getting John Gotti or whatever. It's like going and getting these guys out of prison while they're serving their time and saying, we want you to be the spokespeople for anti-vice, okay, or for non-violence or something like that. And that's basically a good analogy for what's happened. And they get them out of jail. Now, you can't just, at least in theory, go and spring people from jail. You need a judicial order to do that. Same thing in the U.S. Like if you go to Georgia, the state of Georgia, and somebody's locked up in prison there, the governor can't just go and pull that person out of prison and take them for a walk. I mean, maybe there's a way to pardon that person if you're going to forgive them or something like that, but you can't bring them out to go and perform for you or to have lunch with you or something like that. There are procedures that have to be done. So anyway, the Petro administration somehow goes and pulls these people out of jail, and without any kind of framework or judicial order or anything like that, brings them to the stage, which you could say this is a political rally. So what are you getting, the criminals? What do you want, the criminal vote? And so what that did, of course, it generated a lot of criticism from not only Medellin's mayor, Federico Gutierrez, but also from Rendón, the governor. And they condemned the actions of the president. They filed complaints and things like that. And also, so FICO, and we wrote about this, go look on financecolombia.com, wrote letters to the U.S. government, to the DEA and the FBI, denouncing Petro and his people for colluding with criminals, for allying with criminals. And these are people who are involved in narcotics and extortion and things like that. Not only that, the senator, so Petro put, like, you know how they make these blue ribbon commissions and all kind of nonsense like that. So maybe a president, like in the U.S., will get allies in Congress and say, I'm going to make a committee and you guys are going to go and investigate blah, 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 or whatever. So basically, so Petro puts one of his close allies in Congress, Isabel Zuleta. She's a super leftist congresswoman, super allied with Petro and Petro's project and everything like that in his Pacto Histórico. And so she apparently, at least the accusations are that she was the one who orchestrated the release of these criminals, the temporary release to come and participate in this political rally. The thing is, that's even worse because she's not even in the executive branch. She's a senator. So as a legislator, you have even less direct power. You can't just, it's like in the U.S., or like in let's say in Europe or in the UK in the parliament. You're a parliament member, an MP. You can't just go and start ordering things around. Actually, in the parliamentary system, you do get to be part of the government. So you might be an MP, and then I'm going to put you and make you on the cabinet, and you're going to be in charge of minister of such and such. But in a congressional system, like in the U.S. or what Colombia, a lot of Latin American countries have, you can't just do that. You can't just be like, I'm a congressperson. I have no executive authority. The separations of power are a lot more clear cut in a congressional system than in a parliamentary system. And so now she's facing a formal investigation by the Supreme Court for abuse of power related to springing these jokers from jail. Now, they took them back to jail. They had a nice air-conditioned bus for them and everything like that. And the guys all returned to jail. But it's potentially illegal to go and spring these people from jail for your political means like that. Now, uh, she got kind of upset when Fico, the mayor, Federico Gutierrez, came out and complained about this and made all these denunciations about her. Fico complained to the Supreme Court. She actually had to come and retract her statements that she made because Fico was like, hey, look, these people are in league with criminals. And she was like, you're in league with criminals. Well, he filed a complaint. And in Colombia, it's not like the U.S. where you can just say any kind of crazy thing. In Colombia, if you say something against a public figure, they can complain, and if you can't back up your claims, they can force you to issue a public retraction. So let's suppose you put something on Twitter, and you're like, your mama eats babies, or something like that. Then they can complain and say, you don't have the proof of that. And then if that's true, you have to come out and say, I retract my statement that I do not have any evidence that your mama ate babies or something like that. Then that's actually how it works. And if you don't do it, they'll lock you up. So the implications for next year's political election are interesting because now the opposition has a strong case to say, look, these guys are allied with criminals because they're holding rallies. They're holding political rallies. Now, the Petro administration would say it's not a political rally. We're trying to promote peace and blah, 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 and things like that. But the way it's being painted right now, and I think that there's some justification to this, is that this is a political rally against, in league with criminals. Speaking of criminals, the noose is tightening around former Pinturita. That's what they call the former mayor Quintero. That's his nickname, according to a lot of people. And he's even talked about this, so it's not like I'm making anything up. So in Colombia, you have two kind of prosecutors' offices. You have the Fiscalia, which is like the Attorney General's office, Department of Justice, whatever, and they come and they'll lock you up and put you in jail. And then you have another kind of parallel type of prosecutor called a Procuraduría. Now, keep in mind that these words are used differently in different Spanish-speaking countries. So you might go to Dominican Republic and they'll just say Procuraduría and not say Fiscalia, or you might go to another country and it's different. But in Colombia, you have both. And the Procuraduría is responsible for public figures, not public figures, but public officials. So let's suppose you're an employee of the government, or you're, basically, or like you're an elected official or something like that. Now, once you're in Congress or the presidency, only the Supreme Court can investigate you. But the Procuraduría can take you out of office, or they can keep you from holding public office for things like corruption and things like that. So the Procuraduría has just ruled that two of former Medellín mayor Daniel Quintero's allies cannot hold public office for 9 years. That would be Natalia Urrego Arias, who was the Secretary of Infrastructure, and Jorge Enrique Jevano Ospina, who was a manager of Metro Parques, the city park administrations. And they can't hold any kind of public office for 9 years. Now, the Fiscalia can still go and take this investigation, expand upon it, and if it wants to, and if it finds enough evidence and things like that, proceed with criminal charges and then have these people locked up. But the confirmed sanctions relate to a 2020 contract for let's call it green zone maintenance. And so you have in any city, you've got the city parks and things like that, and city greenways, and like you'll have a parkway. And so if you've been to Medellín and you go to like Laureles, you'll see all these beautiful trees. They're Laureles trees, or bay leaves, which is why the neighborhood's called Laureles. And all these areas have to be maintained and things like that. And so there's this big contract, 5.2 billion pesos, And normally with a big contract, you've got to put that out for public bidding, right? You've got to put it out there and say, okay, who's going to bid on the contract and such, and the best person or the best contractor wins. And it's all supposed to be transparent, and anybody can go and read the contracts and read the records of the bids and things like that. So Metro Parques, in this case, what they did was they held a private invitation to bid, meaning that, yeah, they had to get 3 quotes, but instead of putting it out for a public tender, they went and selected 3 companies that could bid on this contract. The 3 companies that they selected were all controlled by the same family. It's a political supporter close to Quintero and his administration. So they created a fake appearance. So basically, whoever wins the contract is the same people that's going to be doing it. So it's like if I say I'm going to make 3 companies and I have one Lauren Co. and then I make my daughter have one Lauren 2, and then my wife has one Lauren 3, and we're all going to bid on a contract. Well, it's all coming back to the same household. It would be something like that. That's exactly what happened. And so by doing that, and then they declared that this contract had to be an emergency, which it wasn't, but they did that to circumvent the fair bid process. And so now they are busted, and Quintero himself is facing criminal charges. There's the Aguas Vivas, which is a real estate manipulation scheme. And as he left office, and now the wheels of justice are turning, and it looks like they're getting closer and closer to him. So that's happening right now as well. Today, the Andrés Rendón, Julian Rendón, the governor of Antioquia, which is the Colombian department where Medellín is located, is on his way to Washington. Federico Gutierrez was going to go. He was invited, but actually next week he has to give, or this week he has to give rendición de cuentas. That's where he gets up and talks about kind of like the state of the city. So in the U.S., you have a State of the Union address where the president has to go before Congress and say, this is how it's supposed to be, where you're supposed to talk about the country. But in modern times, it's where they get up and talk about how great they are. So basically what happens is in Colombia, the different government agencies have to give a rendition of accounts. That's actually what it translates as, rendition of accounts. And so they have to talk about, here's the state of the city, here's what the economic condition is, the revenues of the city, the expenditures of the city, what we've accomplished, the crime rate, this, that, and the other. And that's already previously scheduled, and that's a super important thing. So Fico didn't go. But Rendón is in Washington. He's getting to Washington today, and the rest of this week he's going to be speaking with the U.S. State Department. They invited him there. He also went with business groups Pro Antioquia, which is kind of like, it's not exactly like it's sort of like a gremio. It's sort of like a trade group of different different business interests, business people and companies and entrepreneurs and things like that in Antioquia. They are also going to accompany him on this trip. Aso Capitals is also going. Aso Capitals is an association of Colombian capital cities. There's kind of something like this. I know in the U.S. there's a governor's association, but this is where the capitals of all the Colombian departments have their own kind of interest group to represent the interest of larger cities. So the mayor of Bogotá, the mayor of Medellín, the mayor of Ibagué, the mayor of Cali, all of these different cities, they have their kind of their organization. So they're also going to be there as well. Rendón, aside from meeting with them, is going to give a lecture at the Inter-American Defense College. And he also has some other talks and things like that he's going to be doing this week there in Washington. We'll be paying attention to that and following that closely. Be sure, of course, to get the full story at financecolombia.com. Make sure that you like and subscribe. Be sure to subscribe to Colombia Business News Recap so that we can keep you updated on these things. Thank you so much for listening, and on to the next one.